When you see Obi-Wan Kenobi's shimmering ghost appear to Luke, or, Hamlet talking to his father's spirit, we just accept it. It's part of the story.
Right. It's fiction. We think of ghosts as spooky stuff for movies and campfires.
But here's the thing that's so fascinating. Scientifically speaking, that feeling of a presence or the concept of a ghost, it isn't some fringe idea at all.
No, not at all. It's a persistent, almost universal phenomenon that it seems the human brain is just wired to generate.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, we are not here to prove or disprove if ghosts are real in a supernatural sense.
Mhm.
Our mission in this deep dive is to look at the huge body of research from neuroscience, psychology, anthropology, to understand why. Why is the human mind so incredibly receptive to this idea?
We're really looking at ghost belief as a cognitive thing, an adaptive response, because, the statistics are pretty staggering. Depending on how you ask the question, anywhere from 30 to over 60% of people today believe.
It's definitely not just some primitive holdover, as the researchers call it. As we're about to unpack, this whole thing seems to function as a really complex adaptive tool. It helps us manage grief, deal with uncertainty.
And just our basic human need to make sense of the world. So let's start with the data, because the numbers themselves are pretty surprising.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack the numbers. Because if you think ghost belief is some rare thing, well, think again. In the U.S. alone, the data tells a really interesting story.
Yeah, you've got a 2025 Gallup poll that found 39% of American adults believe in ghosts, which is already a big
That's a
number.
very big number.
But then you look at another survey from 2024 from Real Clear Opinion Research, and that number just skyrockets to 61.4%.
Whoa, that's a huge gap. What's going on there?
Well, it probably comes down to definition. What does believing in a ghost even mean? Is it seeing a full-on apparition, or just feeling a presence, or just being open to the idea? But either way, it shows that a massive chunk of the population accepts this as a reality in some form.
And what happens when we zoom out globally?
Well, the belief in life after death, which is sort of the foundation for all of this, is even higher. A huge Pew Research Center study from 2025 found a median of 64% globally believe in it.
And you can really see the cultural footprint on the map.
Oh, absolutely. You see the highest rates in places like Indonesia, where it's around 85%, and then it drops way down in Northern Europe. Sweden's at the bottom with only 38%. Culture is clearly a huge factor.
But the demographics are where it gets even more interesting because it just shatters some of our assumptions. Let's start with gender.
Yeah, this is a really consistent finding. Women consistently show higher belief than men. We're talking 42% for women versus maybe 28 to 33% for men.
And they're more likely to report an actual encounter.
Right, way more likely. An Ipsos poll found women were 1.5 to 2 times more likely to say they've actually encountered some kind of entity.
Okay, and then you have education, which shows that sort of classic inverse relationship you see with a lot of these beliefs.
Right. People with a bachelor's degree or higher tend to show lower belief, around 22 to 28%. For those with less than a bachelor's, it's a bit higher, more like 25 to 38%. The theory is that analytical training just gives you more of a skeptical buffer.
Which brings us to the real twist in the data. Religious attendance. You'd think people who go to church every week would be more likely to believe in supernatural beings.
You would think so, but for ghosts specifically, it's the exact opposite. It's a really strong inverse correlation.
How does that work?
Well, people who attend church weekly, only 22% believe in ghosts. But for those who seldom or never go, that number jumps up to 40%. The research calls it a protective effect.
So the theology itself is acting as a kind of filter?
Exactly. In a lot of established religions, like Catholicism, there are very strict rules about where souls go. Heaven, hell, purgatory. The afterlife is, highly structured.
So there's no theological room for a soul to just hang out in the attic.
Precisely. The doctrine provides a definitive answer that just excludes the idea of a casual haunting. It's already been explained.
And the research also shows this isn't just a simple on-off switch for belief. It's more of a profile.
Yeah, using a technique called latent class analysis, they found these distinct groups. You have your skeptics, about 47%, and your believers at 26%. It suggests we all have different ways of processing the world that make us open to some supernatural ideas, but not others.
And that processing, that brings us right into the brain. Because this is where we get the real science behind why a shadow on the wall suddenly looks like a person.
This is where it gets really cool. It's all about cognitive mechanisms, these mental shortcuts our brains take.
We're not being logical, we're just being fast.
Exactly. And a massive review of 71 studies found a consistent link between paranormal belief and what's called an intuitive thinking style.
Meaning, you go with your gut.
Yep. Rapid, emotional, non-analytical judgments. If you're someone who tends to jump to conclusions based on a gut feeling, you are just statistically more likely to believe in supernatural agents.
Plus, our brains are basically designed to see things that aren't there. We all know pareidolia.
Right, seeing a face on Mars or in a piece of toast. Or, more to the point, seeing a figure in a swirl of fog or a pile of clothes in a dark room.
And that works together with another bias, right? Agency detection.
Yes, and this is a deep evolutionary thing. It's a survival mechanism. If you're an early human and you hear a rustle in the grass, it is much safer to assume it's a predator, an agent with intent, and run.
Rather than stick around and find out it was just the wind.
Precisely. So we are hypersensitive to detecting agency. We misattribute random events, a cold spot, a creaking floorboard, to an intentional ghostly action. Our brain's default is, something is here, not the house is settling.
Okay, this is where it gets really wild for me. The neuroscience behind the feeling of presence. That FOPP thing, that incredibly creepy feeling that someone is standing right behind you when you know you're alone.
And this isn't just a vague feeling. They can actually track it to specific activity in the brain. This is the big wow moment in the research.
So what's happening? Which parts of the brain are lighting up?
The key areas are the ones that manage our sense of self. You've got the insular cortex, which is about self-awareness, the sensoromotor cortex for body mapping, and the big one, the temporal-parietal junction, or TPJ.
Let's slow down on the TPJ. What does that do exactly?
Think of it as your brain's GPS for your own body. It integrates all this sensory data to tell you where you end and the rest of the world begins.
Okay.
So, in patients with temporal lobe epilepsy, who often report seeing apparitions, MRIs show interference right in those areas. The ghost is basically the brain's explanation for a glitch in its own map of itself.
So if the TPJ gets confused, it generates a sensation that something else is in your personal space, even when nothing is there.
Yes. The brain has to explain the conflicting signals, so it externalizes the source. And researchers actually proved this in a lab with the Bayesian ghost experiment. It's incredible.
Tell us about the robot ghost. This sounds like science fiction.
It's amazing. They blindfolded participants and put them between two parts of a robot. The person moves their own arm, and the robot behind them mimics the movement by touching their back, but, and this is the key, with a tiny calculated delay.
So wait, I move my hand forward, and like a fraction of a second later, I feel a tap on my back.
Exactly. Your brain expects the action and the sensation to be perfectly synced. When they aren't, when that tap comes just a little too late, the brain registers a sensory mismatch. It can't explain it.
And the result?
The result was that 30% of these healthy participants spontaneously reported feeling an illusory presence. They felt like someone else was in the room with them, touching them.
30% from a sensory lag. So that supports the whole predictive coding model, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The brain is constantly making predictions. When reality doesn't match the prediction, it has to create a new story to make sense of the data. And in this case, the most logical, if incorrect, story is a ghost. It's literally the brain's best guess.
Okay, so the brain can misfire and create a ghost, but that doesn't explain why the belief is so resilient, why it sticks with us across cultures. The research makes a really strong case that this belief is actually adaptive. It's good for us.
This is where the science gets really humane, I think. And the most powerful link is with grief management. The connection between losing someone and then sensing their presence is the single most robust finding in all of this literature.
We call them grief hallucinations, which sounds scary, but the research says they're a normal, even healthy response.
Totally healthy. I mean, think about the scale of this. A landmark study from 1971 found that nearly 50%, half of widows in Wales and England, reported seeing their deceased husbands.
50%, and that wasn't an outlier, was it?
Not at all. Later research by Agneta Grimby found that over 80% of elderly people reported these experiences within a month of losing their spouse. It is astonishingly common.
Well, so what's the function? What do these experiences actually do for people?
They provide what the literature calls instantaneous relief from painful grief symptoms. They strengthen a person's spiritual beliefs. They help them find meaning in the loss. It's so beneficial that some grief experts, like Louis Legrand, actually recommend that people actively seek out these extraordinary encounters.
So instead of telling someone, oh, you're just imagining it, we should be saying this is a natural coping tool your brain has developed to get you through the worst thing imaginable.
It's a critical psychological function. And beyond grief, these beliefs give us an illusion of control over things that feel completely random and chaotic. It's a buffer against meaninglessness.
Right. Attributing a tragedy to a spirit, even a scary one, is sometimes easier than accepting that things just happen for no reason.
Exactly. And you see this everywhere. Research that looked at 114 different societies found that 96% of them had supernatural explanations for disease, 90% for natural disasters. When science can't provide a satisfying why, spirits and ghosts fill in that knowledge gap.
And since ghosts are a construct our brains use to make sense of things, the culture we live in basically provides the blueprint for what that ghost looks like.
Totally. The ghost you imagine is entirely shaped by your cultural and religious software. If you're Catholic, for example, the official doctrine says a ghost isn't a lost soul. The souls have their assigned places.
So any apparition must be something else?
More likely a demonic entity in disguise, so contact is forbidden. And this idea of a structured afterlife had huge real-world effects. The belief in purgatory literally fueled the economy of selling indulgences for centuries. Belief in a certain kind of ghost was big business.
Wow. Contrast that with, say, Buddhism.
A totally different model. In Buddhism, you have hungry ghosts, or pretas. They aren't there to be feared. They're suffering entities. The living perform rituals to help them, to appease them so they can progress spiritually. It's about compassion.
And in Hinduism, there's a really clear line between honored ancestors and restless spirits, right?
A very clear line. Ghosts are often souls who died violently or didn't get the proper funeral rites. The rituals are seen as essential to ensure a peaceful transition and prevent a haunting.
The variations are fascinating. You see it in East Asia, too. In China, ancestor worship is key because if you mess it up, you can create a malevolent spirit. And Japan's yurei are famous now as vengeful horror movie figures.
Like from The Ring, yeah.
Yeah.
But historically, they were seen as much more neutral. That shift to pure vengeance was really popularized by the drama of No Theater.
For me, the most compelling part is the social function of ghosts, especially in history. In early modern England, they weren't just spooky stories.
No, they were what the research calls flexible imaginative resources. They were tools for justice.
Tell us that story of Madame Savage.
It's a perfect example from 1707. Her ghost didn't just rattle chains, it communicated by knocking to expose a financial crime that had been committed against her granddaughters.
So the ghost was like a supernatural whistleblower.
Exactly. It was a mechanism for enforcing moral norms and correcting injustices when the legal system failed. You might be able to fool a judge, but you can't fool a ghost who knows the truth. It's the ultimate accountability.
So this deep dive really shows that the ghost is maybe one of the most enduring, most adaptable psychological tools the human brain has ever created. Let's recap the biggest takeaways here.
Okay. First, ghost belief is almost universal, and it's driven by our built-in cognitive biases. Things like pareidolia, seeing faces in the static and agency detection, our evolutionary instinct to assume that bump in the night has a purpose.
Right. It's a feature, not a bug. Second, that creepy feeling of presence isn't supernatural. It can be created in a lab. It's a product of sensory mismatch linked directly to the temporoparietal junction in the brain, our internal GPS getting scrambled.
And third, this belief system is a powerful adaptive psychological mechanism. It helps us manage the intense pain of grief through what we call grief hallucinations. And it gives us an illusion of control and meaning in a world that often feels random and chaotic.
So at the end of the day, modern research doesn't see ghost belief as a failure of logic. It's a complex, deeply human response that combines our neuroscience, our culture, and our psychology. It's just how our brain copes.
But here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on. The research notes that while these beliefs can be really positive, especially in grief, they're not always harmless. When paranormal belief is combined with certain cognitive traits like high transliminality, which is sort of a porous boundary between your conscious and unconscious mind, it can actually predict poorer psychological health and more stress.
So if ghosts are largely a creation of our own minds, a tool designed to help us cope, the real question becomes, how do we learn to harness that powerful internal mechanism for comfort and for meaning without letting that same adaptive tool push us over the edge into genuine distress and fear?